wanted to hear people talk, experts talk on COVID-19 from the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute. And I said I'd send it out. A few people were interested. I said I'd send it out. Anyone here interested?
Not much response.
All right, we'll forget about it then. Easy done. But if anyone does, if they email me, I'll be able to send them a what do we call it? A recording of it.
Yeah.
I'm unable to attend, but they're going to send me a recording. And look, Albert, I'll apologise. I won't be in the China today.
That's fine. That's fine.
One today. They're sort of said about it. Just ask them to email me, and I'll help them.
G'day, Sam.
Okay.
Cyril, to be honest with you, you're hearing so much about COVID that
I agree, Albert. I've done the same myself. I've steered away from it, except for the announcements lately.
Oh, well, that's, yeah. Oh, we need to know that, yes.
Mm.
Okay, I'm now sharing a screen.
Albert? Other Albert?
Okay, let's start playing this video. Today we'll talk about the supervolcano. So let's hear what is that supervolcano first.
74,000 years ago, our world witnessed an eruption unprecedented in human history. On the Indonesian island of Sumatra, a volcano blew its top with such force it would reshape the entire planet. The Toba supervolcano eruption was an event unlike any other. While dozens of supervolcanoes have gone off in the course of Earth's history, Toba remains the one to be witnessed by humans, spitting out enough debris to bury an area the size of the United States. It was tens of thousands of times bigger than Mount St. Helens. Huge swaths of Asia were lost beneath burning debris. Ash rained down as far away as Lake Malawi, some 7,000 kilometers distant. It was simply the mother of all eruptions. But what effects did this explosion have on the rest of the planet? Until recently, it was thought that the Toba catastrophe nearly wiped out humankind, reducing our species to as few as 1,000 individuals. Now, though, startling evidence has emerged that humans not just survived Toba's aftermath, but actually thrived. Today, we're examining the eruption and the aftermath of human history's greatest supervolcano. If you were to go hiking through the mountains of northern Sumatra, you might just stumble across a special lake. An elongated stretch of blue water with a vast island in the middle, Lake Toba is today a tourist attraction. The sort of peaceful place you might unwind after escaping the city. But this tranquility is just an illusion. Deep in the regions past, a violent cataclysm took place here, one forceful enough to not just create the lake itself, but to lay waste to the continent. Known as the Toba Event, it was the biggest supervolcano eruption in the last 2 million years. Although we know of nearly 50 super eruptions in Earth's history, supervolcanoes themselves are actually pretty rare. There are only thought to be 6 currently in existence, the most famous of which lies below Yellowstone National Park. The term supervolcano didn't even enter popular usage until the 21st century, and it's only recently been defined in a scientific sense. To get the most out of the story of Toba, it's important we understand exactly what that definition is. Volcanoes are measured using something known as the Volcanic Explosivity Index, or VEI, which basically does for giant fire-spewing mountains what the Richter scale does for earthquakes. Running from 0 to 8, it measures the amount of debris a volcano hurls into the air in cubic kilometers, rising each time by a factor of 10. So at VEI 1, you have eruptions that pump out a mere 0.001 cubic kilometers of burning death, while VEI 2 eruptions pump out up to 0.01 cubic kilometers, VEI 3 up to 0.1, and so on and so forth. We should point out here that it's totally possible to have a volcano with a VEI of 0 that still manages to be destructive, like those ones in Hawaii that leak lava all over people's lawns without actually exploding. But the general rule of thumb is the higher a volcano's VEI, the more destructive it is. By the time you reach level 8, meaning over 1,000 cubic kilometers kilometers of nightmare horror is sent spewing forth, you're likely talking a planet-wide catastrophe. It's at VEI-8 that we enter into the realm of supervolcanoes. Now, if you're anything like us, you probably find this VEI stuff both interesting, but also just a bit hard to grasp. So we're going to try and take a moment here to help you get your heads around just how psycho-crazy Toba-style VEI-8 blasts are by gently moving up the scale and comparing eruptions. Let's start with an eruption that everyone's heard of, Mount St. Helens. On May the 18th, 1980, the United States experienced the deadliest, most destructive volcanic event in its history. In Washington state, Mount St. Helens blew its top, killing 57 people, wiping out 250 homes, and flattening 600 square kilometers of trees. If you're above a certain age, you always certainly remember the catastrophe as a bit of a massive deal. But not according to the Volcanic Explosivity Index. Destructive as it was, Mount St. Helens barely clocked in at a VEI of 5. The blast released almost exactly 1 cubic kilometer of tephra, the lowest possible for a VEI 5 eruption. So if a low VEI 5 is capable of Mount St. Helensing a region, what might a VEI 6 do? Well, the answer to that came in the summer of 1883. That August, Krakatoa exploded with a bang so loud it circled the planet 4 whole times. The eruption killed over 36,000 people and sent tsunamis crashing into coasts thousands of kilometers away. If Mount St. Helens were like stubbing your toe, then Krakatoa was like stepping on a landmine, an event of such greater magnitude that the two just aren't really comparable. And at this stage, we've only moved up 1 level on the VEI scale, and already we've seen massive differences. But we're still 2 levels shy of a supervolcano. Now let's move up to VEI 7, eruptions of such rare destructive power that there's only been one inaugural blast of this size in the last 2,000 years, Tambora in 1815. And what a blast it was. Although Tambora was initially less deadly than Krakatoa, killing a mere 10,000 people, its after effects were world-changing. So much stuff spewed out that the planet cooled, turning 1816 into the year without a summer. Ice froze European rivers in August. In Virginia, it snowed on the 4th of July. Crops across the planet failed, leading to over 80,000 indirect deaths. To return to our metaphor, if Krakatoa was stepping on a landmine, then Tambora was clambering atop a giant pile of TNT and casually dropping a lit cigarette. All of which finally brings us to supervolcanoes. Just as Mount St. Helens was nothing against Krakatoa, so Tambora would be a mere firefly fluttering next to the inferno of a super eruption. A VEI-8 event is simply so big that it dwarfs every other volcanic eruption in human history, like comparing catching a cold to dying of Spanish flu. And now that we've finally wrapped our heads around just how colossal these eruptions are, it's time to look at the biggest in human history, Toba. It's often said that Toba is the only supervolcano eruption in history. Thus, if you're watching this from New Zealand, you might heartily disagree with that assessment. After all, Lake Taupo on North Island gave off a glorious level 8 eruption about 26,500 years ago, far more recent than the Toba blast. The big difference is that no humans, neolings, had yet arrived in New Zealand when Taupo went up. Asia, by contrast, was already populated when Toba blew its top. It's likely there were even early humans with front-row seats. In 2017, ancient human teeth were found in Sumatra, dating from around the time of the Toba event. But even if they arrived slightly later, there were still ancient Homo sapien cousins like Homo Floresiensis, aka the Indonesian hobbits, living locally. Toba, then, is unique in that it's the only supervolcano eruption that had an impact directly witnessed by our ancestors. And boy, did Toba ever have a lot of impact. The run-up to Toba's catastrophic blast was punctuated by a series of smaller eruptions. Around 1.2 million years ago, and again around 500,000 BC, 2 VEI-6 blasts tore through Sumatra, stepping on a landmine or Krakatoa level from our scale previously. If you came into this video assuming that supervolcano always meant super eruption, this might come as a bit of a surprise to you, but the reality is that supervolcanoes don't normally blow at full capacity. Yellowstone, for example, has only 3 super eruptions in its history, but hundreds more that didn't quite qualify as a level 8. So Toba was very much active when early humans arrived in Indonesia. Unfortunately, they had no way of knowing this. With writing still a hell of a long way off from being invented, there were no records or signs saying, "Warning, don't live near this fiery murder mountain." What there were natural warning signs, ones that, ironically, may have served to draw early humans to the island. Signs like rich volcanic soil that made Sumatra such a paradise. Signs like the rumblings that it's thought began periodically echoing out of Toba in the centuries before its cataclysmic blast. Perhaps the run-up to the final eruption was marked by a growing sense of dread among whatever tribes inhabited Sumatra's dense rainforests, a panic that swept through its members as the mountain started doing stranger and stranger things. Maybe they invented rituals to appease the mountain god, or maybe there was no warning, just a normal, regular day that became a catastrophe. All we know for certain is that circa 72,000 BC, the Toba volcano exploded with a force unprecedented in the last 2 million years. The blast was big enough to vaporize any mountaintop that may have stood there, leaving behind a crater almost 100 kilometers long. Gigantic clouds of hot ash billowed out at high speed, a wall of death superheated to over 1,100 degrees Celsius, traveling at 320 kilometers an hour. Anything that pyroclastic flow touched would have died instantly, burned up and buried in a fraction of a second. Running would have been useless, hiding unless in a very deep cave, only likely to prolong your agony. As the ash spewed out, burying Sumatra, the scale of the carnage would have been incomprehensible. Who knows how many tribes with all their culture and history perished in those first moments. Yet as bad as this was, it was only the beginning. The Toba eruption would soon affect not only Sumatra, not only Asia, but the entire world. To say prehistoric Indonesia was an unpleasant place to be after the Toba eruption is a little like saying being exiled to Siberia isn't a barrel of laughs. Thick ash would have fallen across the islands, grey and deadly. While it looks like gunky snow in pictures, volcanic ash is nowhere near so light and fluffy. It's heavy as hell, able to collapse structures. Breathe it in and it forms a mixture in your lungs akin to cement. Anyone who breathed the Toba ash would have suffocated. At the same time, that ash would be poisoning fresh water sources it landed in and turning the sea around Indonesia into a sickly sludge. But the effects were felt much further away than just Sumatra's immediate neighborhood. So much ash spewed forth from Toba that a layer 5 centimeters thick on India over 5,000 kilometers away. At such thickness, it would have killed off vegetation and likely triggered all sorts of terrible floods. To put that in perspective, this would be like a volcano that erupted in Ecuador, blanketing Chicago with ash and killing wildlife in Lake Michigan. And India wasn't even the furthest place affected. Ash deposits from Toba have been discovered in Lake Malawi, a distance of over 7,000 kilometers, almost exactly the distance separating Mount Etna in Italy from Rhode Island. At both the North and South poles, it's thought sulfuric acid rained down. The volcanic gases that escaped Toba, meanwhile, circled the entire world. There were undoubted climactic effects. A 2009 study found that entire forests probably died in central India as a result of the super eruption. For a long time, some scientists thought humanity almost died out too. The Toba catastrophe theory first appeared in the early 1990s, both as a result of studying Toba itself and as a result of studying genetics. As researchers ran computer models to predict the effects of Toba, they found the eruption may have caused global temperatures to plunge by up to 15 degrees Celsius. 15 degrees Celsius. When you realize how worked up people are by the thought of the climate warming by a mere 3 Celsius, you realize how dramatic this would have been. In some papers, it was suggested that the Toba event was so powerful, the global cooling may have lasted for 1,000 years. Around the same time, other scientists working with human mitochondrial DNA discovered what appeared to be a genetic bottleneck occurring between 50,000 and 100,000 years ago. It wasn't long before researchers began to wonder if one hadn't caused the other. The theory that emerged was one of the grimmest and most chilling ever proposed. It suggested that the Toba event had been so big and its effects on the climate so drastic that nearly all humans perished in its volcanic winter. At its most extreme, the theory suggested humans got down to as few as 1,000 breeding pairs. That's an incredibly tiny number, so small it's dwarfed by the number of daily customers in your average Walmart. If true, it would mean that we humans had tiptoed up to the very edge of extinction and peered into the abyss, only to step back at the last possible second. However, it's a very big if. While the Toba catastrophe theory became wildly popular in the 2000s, with everyone from NPR to Cracked covering it, current research suggests a rather different story, one that's staggering in its implications. Rather than nearly dying out in the wake of Toba, humanity may not have only survived, but also thrived. The idea that Toba caused a planet-cooling disaster seems so intuitive that it can be hard to shake off. After all, the 1815 Tambora eruption screwed things up for an entire year, all while being just a fraction of the size of the Toba blast. Yet there are good reasons to think Toba's effects weren't as far-reaching as the catastrophe theory suggests, and one of them has to do with magma. Not all magmas are created equal. Depending on the volcano, it can be capable of holding very different amounts of dissolved sulfur and carbon dioxide. This is important because sulfur dioxide is one of the key ingredients for a volcanic winter, the type that might cause a massive population crash. Basically, a whole ton of it in the atmosphere can backscatter the sun's radiation, a fancy way of saying that it stops it from reaching the ground and therefore cools the planet. A chemical analysis of Toba's ash has recently suggested that its magma can't hold much sulfur. That means a Toba blast probably has less effect on global temperature than a similar-sized eruption from a different volcano out in ancient coastal sites found in South Africa. Recent excavations identified a layer of minuscule glass shards created in the superheated inferno of Toba and subsequently scattered across much of the world. This means it's easy to tell which artifacts were buried before the blast and which ones after. At both sites in South Africa, there was clear evidence of more human activity after Toba went off, more tool building, more early attempts at art, and more food being eaten. In other words, the exact opposite of what you'd expect from an apocalyptic 1,000-year winter. Similar evidence has turned up in India, adding credence to the theory that Toba's volcanic winter was relatively mild. The evidence is so compelling that today the Toba catastrophe theory appears to be on its way out, a relic of the 1990s when we believed in all sorts of weird crap like the Millennium Bug or Wayne's World somehow being superior to Bill and Ted.
No way.
Still, the theory does retain some supporters who point out a severe volcanic winter may have driven humans to seek refuge on Africa's coasts, hence the increased activity at such sites. And really, it's not our place to make a judgment call. We're not qualified volcanologists. All we can do is report what the current scientific consensus is, and let you make up your own minds. But even if the Toba catastrophe was the Chinese democracy of eruptions, overhyped and ultimately forgettable, it would still have had a significant impact on Southeast Asia. Many communities would have been wiped out, and even those that survived would have lived through an era so craptacular it could compete for the title of worst decade in history. All of which brings us to a rather inevitable and chilling question. Could it happen again? Could something reawaken the Toba supervolcano and cause it to unleash an unwanted sequel on humanity? The terrifying answer is that we can't say no for sure. Of all the infamous volcanoes we've name-checked in this video, 3 of them, Krakatoa, Tambora, and of course Toba, all exist in modern Indonesia. That's thanks to Indonesia's prime position on the Pacific Ring of Fire, a gigantic swath of geologically active territory running up the America's west coasts and down Asia's east coast that's home to 75% of the world's volcanoes. It's also where 90% of the planet's earthquakes take place, thanks to a whole load of faults crisscrossing the landscape. One of those faults, the Great Sumatran Fault, runs directly through Mount Toba. This is a bit of a worry because if the Sumatran Fault ever becomes particularly active, it could reawaken Toba's dormant magma chamber. If that happens, then you're suddenly not only dealing with a massive earthquake, but also Toba's first potential super eruption in 74,000 years. Scarily, we might not get very much warning before that happens. We kind of assume we'd see another Toba blast coming, giving us enough time to mass evacuate Sumatra. But that's not guaranteed. It's possible the only warning we'll have is, hey, is it just me, or is Lake Toba starting to, and then there'd be a very loud bang. Even if there's enough time to evacuate, the eruption would still be devastating. Sumatra is home to nearly 60 million people and is about twice the size of the UK. Huge swaths of it would be devastated by superheated pyroclastic flows and then blanketed in ash, causing untold chaos. The city of Medan, for example, is home to both 2 million people and only 140 kilometers away from Lake Toba. Even if you got everyone out before the mega boom, you'd still have to deal with 2 million displaced people whose homes are now buried under a pile of burning horribleness. And Medan is just the start of your problems. The Malaysian capital of Kuala Lumpur is a little over 300 kilometers away, while Singapore is also close enough to start panicking. Remember, the ash from Toba's last super eruption was destructive some 5,000 kilometers distant. At only 300 and 500 kilometers away, Kuala Lumpur and Singapore may as well be built right on top of the magma chamber. However, their ultimate fates would depend on which way the wind was blowing. Remember the hobbits we mentioned earlier who lived in Indonesia at the time of the last Toba eruption? Well, Homo Floresiensis was barely impacted thanks to the winds blowing all the ash away from them. While anyone within 100 kilometers of Toba when it erupted would be dead no matter what happened to everyone else would depend on whether the ash cloud headed towards civilization or out to sea. If it was blown east towards Malaysia, Singapore, and the rest of Indonesia, then we'd see carnage on an unprecedented scale. Trees and crops would be killed as the ash fell down, animals would ingest toxic chemicals, dying by the millions, water supplies would become undrinkable, electricity lines would come crashing down, and transport and therefore escape would become impossible. It would be a humanitarian disaster, one that killed untold numbers and paralyzed Southeast Asia for months or even years. On top of that, it would also crash the global economy. As we've seen with COVID, disrupting global supply chains tends to screw everyone, and supply chains out of Asia would be disrupted on a scale vaster than even what we experienced in 2020. So, yeah, Toba super eruption, not the funnest thing ever. But what if we could somehow ensure no supervolcano on Earth ever erupted again? Not so very long ago, NASA scientists sat down to solve the problem of supervolcanoes for good. Using Yellowstone as their model, they estimated that the 35% increase in heat transfer out of the magma chamber would stop it from ever exploding. To do this, all you'd have to do would be drill down into the supervolcano and start pumping in high-pressure water. With every passing moment, more heat would be extracted until, way over 100 years after the project first started, the magma would be cool enough to end the threat of an eruption for good. It sounds like science fiction, but it's theoretically possible even now, and it could be a way to neutralize our planet's supervolcanoes for good. Because make no mistake, these dormant monsters will explode again one day. It may not be for tens of thousands of years, or even for hundreds of thousands, but somewhere in Earth's future, there's a dark day waiting for us, a day when the sky turns black, and an annihilating wall of fire spews out of the ground, destroying everything in its path. Right now, Toba remains the only super eruption ever witnessed by humanity. We can only pray that it stays that way. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below. Don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for watching.
Okay, let's stop the sharing. Okay. So I very a very bleak talk. The Toba is the mother of all volcanoes. I think I do agree that our human bottleneck is due to that volcano, because it is really, really bad. And for that volcano, the wind is blowing west, and that's why India also got all the ashes. Okay, any question?
Just one of the maps that he showed on the Pacific, it really demonstrates the Pacific being known as the Ring of Fire.
Yeah.
Because it's all around the edge of the landmass where it was meeting the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah.
And there's hardly any break in it, just a bit in the south, but pretty uniform.
Yeah. This Friday, in my Chinese channel, we will be talking about the Japanese Fukushima's radioactive spill out in 2011. Is that 2011? Yes. So remember, there was a big tsunami, and is that tsunami? No, is that called tsunami? A big
Yeah.
wash of water.
It damaged the nuclear power stations.
Yeah,
That one, yeah.
yeah. And
If
so
they built them further inland and then tunneled to the water to get the seawater to get the coolant, they would have been okay.
but
Probably.
the issue coming up is that the Japanese government said that the current amount of water, the wastewater they have been used to cool the reactors, is now overflowing, and there is only a sufficient space left to build this kind of large water tanks for before 2021. That means by next year they will run out of space to store that water, and so they are proposing to drain that water into the Pacific Ocean.
Oh.
Not very good.
So that'll affect the fishes and what we eat, and we'll start going funny.
Well, that is really, really bad, because well, they may run out of water near the site. That doesn't mean that we cannot move the water to somewhere else and store it, rather than dumping it into the ocean and affecting everybody else in the world. So that is the issue. In my Chinese channel on Friday nights, we will discuss. Probably after the discussion, I will bring it up for discussion in our meeting somewhere in the near future, because I'm doing research about that and trying to get all the information why and how that accident actually happens. I now have a pretty good idea. It is a design fault.
Mm-hmm.
A design fault, yeah.
Yeah, they make, because of saving money, they make some assumptions which turn out to be incorrect.
Mm-hmm.
So that's very, very bad. But anyway, we might not be.
What do you mean by the human bottleneck?
Human bottleneck, that means about 70,000 years ago, the reproducing pairs of humans dropped down to about 1,000.
All right.
So before that, there will be a lot more humans, but then a big event happens, and suddenly most humans died and left only about 1,000 breeding pairs.
Albert, do you know if that's been reasonably proved, or is it just a theory?
It is a theory at the moment, but we know that it is. We have gone through a very tight bottleneck because our DNA difference is so small. So
that means that all those different variations in humans that existed before that disappeared, and only one sort went on.
Yes, that is the theory. So that is what we observe. Although we see ourselves very different, some are black, some are yellow, some are white, etc., different hair, but these are just very minor genetic difference. Our genetic difference is much smaller than a lot of other animals. Or at least we don't have other species of Homo existing. So, but again, that is a theory. Go on.
Is that when Neanderthals died out as well? Were they part of that dying out, or did they survive?
That is a good question. That's where now one of the interesting ideas that I find this theory a little bit tricky is that why humans suffer so much whereas some other animals doesn't. for example, we know that in dogs, for example, foxes, dogs, and tigers, etc., they all should go through the same bottleneck if it is a global event. But looking at us, our genetic difference is particularly small compared with other animals. So somehow the more breeding pairs survived, and humans breeding pair really got hit very hard. So there's a question. I don't know whether I can find an answer, because I'm not doing direct research myself. I can only find secondary evidence. So I would try looking for that answer myself. See whether wow, if this is the theory, COVID event, then it should affect everybody else, every other animals. It should be a global event. So, but Toba is a theory, but I quite believe that theory has a huge impact on us. No question?
No more, no.
No.
Yes, Sam?
I just wondered if it was a disease then, not that maybe the winter made us susceptible to a disease that only affected humans.
But that might be a theory. We have to look for evidence to show that this theory is correct or not. Yes, Sam?
Yes, several quite interesting topic, and which is also I have been heard from some other section. And the most interesting one was this morning, yesterday, last night, I heard that the Canadian government have announced that the COVID, again, I think you also know, we also know, but some people are not really want to accept it, that COVID original in the last October already come up from the America. And the Canadian government is going to claim for all these things. Secondly, this one, just leave it to whoever can do. Secondly, that's in case of Fukushima, that one, the Fukushima nuclear, that actually Fukushima is about 200 kilometers away from the sources at Sendai. Or Sendai is outside, I think the source is nearly about 50 kilometers away. And that's the eruptions, the plate move in the case, so that's why it caused the tsunami coming back for about 3 to 5. In some area, it's about 5 meters high, and the water even dipped to about 10 kilometers inside of the city. So most of the city have been destroyed, and the nuclear plants actually, according to the sources, that it should be designed, well, at that time, it should be designed for another 20 years. However, there's some crack, and the crack which cause a problem, and leaking, and then they have been asking a lot of cleaner, whoever is on the expert, to do all this job. So this one no one can do, and still if it's naturally they want to throw it over to the.
I think we have been, sometimes humans dig a hole for ourselves.
Yeah, and finally, which is quite. I live around Lake Toba, and I was born around there. And I heard, I was thinking something else. I heard the Simon said there's a future volcano in this 2020 for the October or November. I don't know, but if this is so, will be quite quite serious one.
Yeah.
As what he said, also Medan is about 150 kilo away, KL is 300 kilo away, and Singapore will be about 500 kilometers away. So, and that is a very congested population area. Mm. But however, the Lake Toba itself is quite natural and beautiful. That's all what I can say. And just beautiful. And the island itself is quite big. Yeah.
Well,
how's the future eruption will be occur in the very recent one?
Nobody knows. Nobody knows when the next eruption will occur. That is the problem. And when we know it might be too late, we don't have a lot of time for preparation.
Looking on the Pacific, the fire, the ring of the fire.
Yep.
That's a week ago, Alaska.
Well, for example, even in I think in San Francisco, there is a great earthquake waiting to happen, and have been delayed and delayed, and the more it is delayed, the more energy is being built up, and therefore when it erupts, it will release more energy and it's more dangerous. The earlier it go off is the better.
Because St. Helens also just that was very recently, and there's another movement on the Earth, which Yellowstone, they are quite worried on the Yellowstone one.
Yeah, but look at COVID-19, and we have a SARS event in 2003, MERS in 2008, and now we have the COVID. Yeah. And about 100 years ago, we had the Spanish flu. It's as bad as COVID. So we can see that coming. Even when we see that coming, we still not well prepared. Put it that way. So
what you were saying before, sorry, you finished?
Yeah.
Yeah, what you were saying before about San Francisco, of course, just over 100 years ago, there was a huge earthquake there, but most of those in the know are predicting an even worse earthquake around San Francisco in the future, and yet people are building where their premises are going to be destroyed.
Wow.
Or probably destroyed.
We are, put it that way, humans are pretty short-sighted.
Well, we build houses and infrastructure in low-lying areas that for now and again will get flooded.
Yeah.
If we don't learn from that.
Well, is that in Sydney or where? Just recently, there are some houses so close to the seashore where the seashore collapsed. Is that in Sydney or in Brisbane?
Yeah, and there's more of it there recently. As the sea levels rise, that's going to be more effect.
Yeah.
Yes.
And even down here in the bay, there's sort of something where the council won't stump up the money to do the work to stop some of the beaches eroding, but that becomes an issue but there's an answer for it, but who's going to pay? And then, you know, insurance isn't, and the owners need to stump up, and there's a case probably for sharing the cost.
Yeah.
But, you know, that's going to be a big issue worldwide, I believe, going forward. It's happened in England a lot. And in England, they have trouble where they get some big sinkholes, which when they're built, they don't know what happened a couple of 100 years ago when they didn't make plans and keep plans and register them. And these mine shafts are there and they give way, and then it's giving away at the surface, and you go out your front door and you've got to cling to the wall to get around. You know, some properties have been lost there. More than what you'd think. It doesn't always get the publicity, but sometimes, you know, you'll see something that's devoted to it.
Yeah.
Getting back to what we were saying about building in the wrong areas, we haven't mentioned one of the most obvious in Australia, and that is building in bushfire susceptible areas.
Well, I think there's an easy answer to some of that. Some different materials, and partly underground, and, you know, slope the roof where the heat will come over it if it's wind and fire. You know, there's answers. Down where my brother lives, they're not allowed to plant any trees that'll go over 2 metres.
Where's that, sir?
Locksport on the Gippsland. Yeah. So, and I would have thought fairly safe there from bigger fires, because it's out on a peninsula at Locksport itself. So you've got water north and south, and so it's from the west, you know.
The worst example is Marysville, where virtually the whole of the town was destroyed, 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, about 12, I think. Yeah.
And they made such a big deal about coming back and rebuilding.
Well, I have been looking at some interesting building technology. One of those is to build a dome.
Yeah.
First of all, dome being a circular structure, a spherical structure. You use the least amount of material to enclose the largest amount of volume. So that is efficient in one sense. The second efficiency is that if you build this using what they call foam concrete, that means you have concrete, but instead of solid concrete, it use a foam, like the washing, you have the foam, so it is very light. And being light also means that it also is a very good insulator. And it is also fireproof. So I think in our bushfire areas, we should promote this kind of building technology.
But what you say about domes is very interesting, because when St Paul's Cathedral was rebuilt after the Great Fire of London in 1666, it was purposely built with actually 2 domes. The roof is one dome, then there's a space, and then there's a second dome, which is the ceiling of the interior.
Yes, Sam?
You know, in Alaska, that's the Eskimos people.
Yeah.
In the dome.
Yeah, they build it also as a dome because it is the easiest way to build using the available material.
And similar to that Mongolian Mongkupang.
Yeah.
Also, nothing to hold it, and just only the curve.
Yeah. So.
And then look at the bridge in the Chinese ancient one. The bridge one, that is a dome style.
Yeah. Because circular structure is a very strong structure.
There's already a light brick that's been available for years. I can't think of the technical name for it, but that's you can cut it with a saw and that, and it's a bit fairly big, I think hollow, but some bone, something. I just forget what's in it, and that's there for insulation and for easy building.
Yeah, and that's the so-called what I call the foam concrete. So they are very lightweight concrete.
Yeah, similar idea.
Yeah, and the interesting that you're using this kind of material to build a regular house. They are not force bearing because being so lightweight, they can't take up a lot. But you use that material to build a dome, then it's different because dome structure is strong because of its shape. So you don't need the material to be very strong to really hold it. So unfortunately, I don't think the council here will allow me to rebuild a dome here.
Try them out. in another way, the bracing you put in a dome would be less than like a traditional box shape, I would think, because it would one bit would support another, and it could be a thinner member of timber or steel, whatever you're going to use.
Yeah, and then you don't need any support in the middle.
Yeah.
So you have a very large space. Yeah.
Like an arch.
Yeah, like an arch.
360 degrees.
I've been to a couple of remarkable buildings in England called the Eden Project. So where they had a big quarry in the ground, what are we going to do with it? They turned it into 2 biospheres and made it a public thing for people to go have picnics, do all sorts of things. One's a cool, temperate climate, and the other one's a hotter one. And they're growing things from all over the world. And there's birds in there, and then they have a thing like our bowl outside, like the Sydney Maya Music Bowl, where they can have concerts. There's food available, there's this, that and the other, and it's a big success. They bring science into it, so different school kids and university students can go there to study various things. It's quite a big success.
Well, the Chinese now use this kind of mine to convert it into a resort hotel. So there was a large hole in the ground, and because of mining, after that they convert that into a hotel. Quite interesting. I maybe want to take up some of that and then show it to you in one of those China Today class.
Yeah. Well, I've been to a hotel in the south of Portugal, and that was built on the side of a cliff. So where you park your car outside, you're going in on the 5th.
And then you go down.
Floors above, floors below.
Yeah.
And when you come out down below, you're on a lower plateau with swimming pool gardens. And then you go, and looking out there, you're looking at cliff face where the ocean comes in.
Yeah.
Yeah, quite remarkable space. Back on the disease there's also something, I forget the name, but a fairly deadly serious disease that was hidden away because it was in the jungle somewhere in Africa, or I think it was, or in a tropical area anyhow, and had been concealed for years. It wasn't a problem. And then as man extends and clears something and makes their presence felt, then it released this and it came to affect humans. But obviously it's not as serious as the COVID thing because it's affected a smaller number of people. Serious in itself, but a smaller number.
I heard someone, I think the AIDS is something also like that, isn't it?
The which is?
AIDS, the human immunology disease, which originate in some primates in the jungle.
Yes.
And then it spread to human. I think it's something like that as well, similar to that.
The eggs come from the apes, but then there's another one which is from the Congo. It's called Ebola.
Ebola. Yeah.
Ebola.
So anyway,
Also, Albert, or everyone, back on the volcanoes, the island of Santorini in Greece is a rim of a volcano where most of it's gone, and the island is just a rim, probably a quarter to a third of the rim of a circle, which is a volcano. There's a bit of a core out in the centre, which is just another island. Ships come in, it's just huge. It's sort of hard. I can't think of the length of the island. It's probably be easy 10, 15 kilometres, maybe about that size. And then it slopes away outside the circle, slopes away gently. So you've got, I don't know, 2-3 kilometres before you hit the water. Just an amazing place. It goes to show how big it would have been back in the times when it blew its stack.
Yeah. Okay. Anyhow, then we've called this finished today for this one, and then we'll see you in China Today next.
Thank you, Albert.
Okay.
One question. I thought I might hear from you. Did you get my email with copy of the PowerPoint on?
Oh, I haven't checked.
Oh, this would be a week ago, just after our last
okay,
session.
So
I
will check it right now, and then I will let you know on the other side of the big history.
All right.
All right. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Goodbye,
Bye.
everybody. And I'll see you all next week. I'm
Yep.
just not going to Apology for China today.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank